My family invited me to the gathering, ostensibly to boast about my cousin's acceptance to Harvard. As everyone erupted in applause, my grandmother let out a sigh, a sound that implied some were simply not cut out for the academic life. I took a deep breath and said, "Funny thing is, I'm his professor." The ensuing silence was so profound, you could have heard the ceiling fan creak. I'd already decided my stay would be brief, just long enough to eat some ribs, hug the few relatives I still tolerated, and give my mother the satisfaction of my presence, preventing her from wrestling with the age-old question of why her son couldn't spare a single afternoon a year for family, a question she loathed yet never voiced outright. The gathering was at Uncle Frank's house in Raleigh. He lived in the kind of suburban neighborhood where mailboxes displayed family names, etched in brass plates, and pathways were illuminated by solar-powered lights, each night putting on a carefully choreographed display. His yard was meticulously manicured, like a country club, and he had one of those enormous grills that cost more than my car. I hadn't attended a family gathering in 2 years. The last one ended with a heated argument with Aunt Margaret about what constituted a real career, after she chuckled when I revealed my university teaching position. "Oh, like a high school teacher?" she'd asked, dabbing sauce from her chin. "How charming." So, no, I wasn't exactly eager to return. I smoothed my shirt twice, but a crease remained in the sleeve. I gave up and grabbed my keys. The drive from Chapel Hill was short. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment near the university. My apartment is tranquil, filled with books everywhere, walls too white, and a slightly sunken couch. I'm not minimalist, just lazy about decorating. I teach comparative literature in DC. 10 years on the road, and now I'm an assistant professor striving for stability. It's a good job, excellent even, but not the kind of thing you boast about at a family gathering. It seems only Harvard-affiliated success holds value. That day, the air felt heavy, clinging to my neck, muddling my thoughts. When I parked in front of the house, I stood in the car for a moment before exiting. I could hear children's shouts from the slip and slide in the backyard. Someone had blasted classical rock from a Bluetooth speaker. The aroma of grilling meat filled the air. I walked towards the yard and saw everyone there, the same faces as always, people I'd known my whole life, but who seemed to have never truly known me. I was the distant cousin, the one with stacks of books and glasses, the one who never quite fit the mold of family, the mold of flesh, funds, or fame. My mother saw me first. She was wearing one of those flamboyant floral blouses, the kind reserved for family events. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, which gave her a youthful appearance, yet her gaze carried the weariness of a lifetime spent maintaining appearances. "Noah," she called, approaching me with a small dish of fruit. "Thank goodness you came," she said, relieved. "I was a little late," I replied. She offered a quick smile, a furtive glance around, as if ensuring everyone observed me. "Go greet your uncles," she whispered. "And Dylan's here. He just got back from orientation." "Oh, certainly. The true reason for the invitation. Dylan, my cousin, a year younger, the family darling. He'd entered Harvard's honors program. The entire family tree had been abuzz for months. WhatsApp groups, Facebook posts. Even a cousin had crafted a PowerPoint presentation in his honor. I hadn't seen Dylan since he was a lanky, awkward high schooler. Now he'd grown taller, slimmer, his hair styled like a university brochure model. I walked towards the barbecue, where adults congregated, their conversations drifting in the warm, humid air. "Harvard," someone murmured, clapping Uncle Greg on the back. "You must be bursting with pride." "Oh, you know," he replied, chuckling with a false modesty. "We've always known Dylan had potential." Dylan's mother, Belinda, was impeccably dressed, like a campaign-ready senator's spouse. A fitted blazer over a sleeveless top, a pearl necklace, hair perfectly sculpted, untouched by even the slightest breeze. "He was top of his class," she added. "He had a choice of all the Ivy League schools, but Harvard was the best option." I stood a few feet away, sipping lukewarm lemonade from a red plastic cup. No one asked me anything. No one even looked at me, except Aunt Margaret, who assessed me with a fleeting glance, like trying to remember if I was someone of importance or not. Applauses began tentatively, escalating into a crescendo of clapping, raised glasses, and beaming smiles. That's when Grandma Ruth, seated in a garden chair tucked in a corner, her legs wrapped in a crocheted blanket despite the heat of the July day, leaned forward just enough to utter a statement I knew was coming. "Some people aren't born to study," she said, her voice as delicate and soft as an aged apple. The words settled like a stone in a still pond. Silence spread. rippling through the air. A peculiar calm ascended my spine. Not anger or sadness, but a serene quietude. I could have remained silent, as I typically did, but that day I was tired of being polite. I set down the cup and declared, "Enough. It's quite apparent to everyone. I happen to be his teacher." The clamor ceased. A kind of quiet where every background sound amplified tenfold, the fan whirring on the porch, the distant mower 2 blocks away, the sizzle of unattended grilling meat. It took a moment for Dylan to process. He slowly turned toward me, his face bewildered as if seeing a ghost. "You're what?" he asked. I didn't reply, simply stared at Grandma Ruth. She blinked and looked away, her expression drooping like damp clothes being wrung out. No one spoke. Not Belinda, not Greg, not Margaret. Neither did I smile or celebrate. I picked up my cup again, took a measured sip, and walked toward the garden, craving a breath of air that no one present knew, or perhaps preferred to ignore. Dylan had been my student for a semester. It was his first year, and he wound up in my comparative literature course, a required subject. Although it was evident from the outset that he loathed being there, during the initial weeks, he arrived late, spoke minimally, and when he did speak, merely repeated phrases he'd gleaned from summaries. His essays were weak, rushed, and utterly disconnected, the kind that screamed, "I couldn't care less about this subject or your opinion of my work. We're not related and you likely don't even recognize me." Perhaps he thought I'd pretend everything was normal, hoping to coast through the semester, relying on charm and last-minute emails as he had done in high school. But I didn't turn a blind eye. I graded his work exactly as I did everyone else's, if anything, perhaps even more rigorously, so no one could accuse me of favoritism. However, hearing him disparaging literature class as a joke to a classmate, saying the professor hadn't even read what we wrote, stung. I spent countless nights, eyes burning, hands aching from annotations, correcting papers, providing extra feedback, nudging students to think more deeply. I cared, even when it seemed no one else did. And so, that day, I didn't feel bad. For the first time in a long time, I'd asserted myself, stopped hiding. Later, sitting on the porch's edge, watching children chase water balloons, my mother joined me, fanning herself with a paper plate. We didn't discuss what had transpired. She simply placed her hand on my knee, pressing gently, a gesture speaking volumes more than 1,000 apologies. Across the garden, I saw Dylan alone near the flower bed. He wasn't smiling. His phone was gone, the group of friends vanished. He stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground, as if searching for something lost. I didn't go to him, nor did I need to. This wasn't about revenge, humiliation, or even respect. It was about being seen. And this time, I had been seen. Dylan hunched near the flower bed. Something within me compelled me to approach him, but I knew it wasn't the right time. Not yet. First, I needed to collect myself, decide precisely what I needed to say. Belinda, who likely hadn't heard a no in her life, was the first to recover from the shock. She marched toward me like a guided missile, each step crushing the immaculate lawn of Uncle Frank's garden. "What are you trying to do, Noah?" she hissed, close enough for all to hear, but loud enough for some to turn their heads. I shrugged, taking the last sip of my warm lemonade. "Nothing. Just telling the truth," I simply stated. She chuckled, that strained, nervous laugh of someone desperately trying to regain control. "You shouldn't even be teaching there. You're not even a tenured professor." That stung more than I cared to admit, as if a decade's worth of work were meaningless, because I hadn't yet reached the pinnacle of my career. "I'm an assistant professor," I graded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, Dylan was my student last semester. Comparative literature." She shook her head as if I'd uttered nonsense. "You understood perfectly what I meant, and you knew he was your cousin, but said nothing. He hadn't either. A flicker of awareness, understanding. I knew she'd meticulously prepared this, but for a moment I saw the truth, the depth of the pain, the real reason why he was so withdrawn. He felt unseen, unheard. A mental list of accusations against me, yet this simple response wasn't in the script. "Why are you doing this to him?" she asked, lowering her voice. "Today is his day. We feel the weight of everyone's gaze. Uncle Frank even turned off the music. The children stopped running. That's when Uncle Greg, Dylan's father, approached. He had that expression of someone just cheated in a deal. He asked, without even looking me in the eye, "What grade did your son get in your class?" I took a deep breath. They truly didn't grasp what was happening there. It wasn't about a C-. Finally, I replied, and the silence grew heavier, almost solid, impenetrable. Belinda shook her head. Dylan has always been not in my class. I responded, feeling an unusual calmness in my own. He barely appeared in my class. He didn't participate. His work was far below what one expects from a Harvard student. You're jealous, came the voice of Grandma Ruth. Suddenly she stood, supported by her cane, her eyes as hard as stones facing me. That's why you failed him, because he achieved what you never did. I laughed, a dry, humorless chuckle. I didn't fail him, Grandma. It's about passing and failing, and I have exactly what I always wanted, an academic career at one of the best universities in the country. Duke isn't Harvard, someone murmured, but loud enough for me to hear. My face heated up. Anger began to rise. Harvard isn't everything, I retorted, looking at each of them. You adore the name, the prestige, the idea, but do you even know what he's studying there? Know his professors? Has anyone here asked if he's happy? The silence continued, but it was different, more uncomfortable. Then my mother approached, placing her hand on my arm, that silent touch that always meant, enough, let's go inside and get some water. I shook my head. No, Mom, not this time. I looked back at Aunt Belinda, Uncle Greg, everyone. You invited me to this meeting, not because you missed me, not because you wanted to see me. You invited me to be an extra spectator to Dylan's grand show, Harvard, to clearly demonstrate who succeeded in this family and who didn't. Well, here's the truth. Dylan barely passed my course, and now he sits there alone because he knows it. Aunt Margaret stepped forward. Everyone knows literature is an easy course, she said, as if explaining something obvious. Dylan is studying serious things, economics and politics. Ask him about Keynes or Marx or any basic economic theory. Let's see if he can explain them. Or better yet, ask him when was the last time he truly read a book from cover to cover. Dylan finally moved. He was coming towards us, his face no longer confused, but defeated. Enough, he said, his voice low. Please, but I couldn't stop you. Do you know how many nights I stayed up correcting papers? How many weekends I sacrificed to prepare lessons while you all were treating my career with disdain? I built something real, something that matters. Uncle Frank intervened in the discussion. And who do you think you are to speak to us like this? We are your family. A bitter taste filled my mouth as my family's reaction to Dylan's struggles underscored a profound truth. Instead of diminishing his accomplishments, family should offer unwavering support, even when understanding eludes them. Genuine interest, however, was absent. When was the last time anyone inquired about my work, my students, my research? The subsequent silence was unlike any I'd encountered before. A profound silence, a palpable indication that a truth had struck home. Dylan approached, halting beside me. They're wrong, he whispered, his voice conveying the weight of his words. No one ever asks. Belinda, seemingly stunned, recoiled as if struck. What are you talking about, son? Dylan's eyes met mine. A brief but meaningful exchange. For the first time, I saw something genuine in his gaze, something beyond the facade of the perfect student. Harvard isn't what you think, he stated, his voice a low murmur. No, it isn't. Not what I thought. He looked at me and our eyes met. I'm not doing well, he finally admitted. In any subject. It's as if the air has been sucked out of the room. Greg took a step towards his son, stopping when Dylan raised a hand. I'm facing probation, he continued. If I don't improve next semester, I'll lose my scholarship. Grandma Ruth, perplexed, inquired, What scholarship? You don't have a scholarship. Your parents pay for Harvard. Dylan shook his head. No, I have a partial scholarship based on my high school performance, but now I'm almost losing it. Belinda appeared close to fainting. Why didn't you ever tell us this? The truth, like a crumbling castle of cards, began to unravel. How could I have kept this secret from them? Dylan responded with a voice I had never heard before. Gone was the confident tone of the prodigious student. Instead, the voice of one exhausted from pretending. You talk about Harvard as if it were some holy grail, he said, his gaze directed toward his parents, his grandmother, and all of us, as if nothing less than perfection is acceptable. He paused, then continued. Do you know how many emails I sent to the whole family when I published my first academic paper? I was trying to get some recognition. 3 people replied. He paused. My father and Aunt Jenny. He paused. And you, Mom? He directed his gaze to his mother, who hung her head in apparent shame. You said, That's good, son. but not in the same vein as the rest. Uncle Frank began to speak but was interrupted. "It's the same thing," Dylan stated. Remarkably, it was my mother who spoke. Exactly the same. She stood up, her crushed napkin clutched tightly in her hand. "You've treated Noah as if he'd chosen a lesser path, as if teaching, writing, researching were some sort of failure. That's absurd." My mother's defense stunned me. In 35 years, I'd never seen her stand up for me like this. "Sarah, this isn't the time." Aunt Margaret attempted to quell the escalating tension. "When is the time, Margaret?" my mother countered. "When is the time to talk about how we treat each other in this family?" An uneasy silence descended upon us. It was then that I noticed something different about Dylan. The defeated expression had vanished. A quiet sense of relief replaced it. "I didn't want to go to Harvard," he confessed in a low voice, "but rather to Berkeley." Belinda seemed about to faint again. "I wanted to study music composition." No one spoke for several seconds. It was as if he had spoken in a different language. "But do you play?" Uncle Greg, genuinely perplexed, asked, "Any instrument?" Dylan met his gaze, a mixture of hurt and resignation evident in his expression. "Piano. For 7 years." A bitter laugh escaped him. While they'd been busy enrolling him in math and debate competitions, he'd spent hours in the school basement practicing. Ms. Keller, the music coordinator, had even lent him the keys for weekend sessions. It felt as though an invisible wall had crumbled between them. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I inquired, genuinely curious. He shrugged. "You'd already decided who I was. The academic prodigy. The next big name. How could he have said he wanted to compose soundtracks?" Uncle Greg seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "But you did so well in high school, in every subject," Dylan responded. "It was easier to give you what you wanted than fight for something different." The tension that had hung in the air since early afternoon was morphing into something else, something more honest, more real, painful, yes, but finally, true. "I was afraid of disappointing you too," he admitted, breaking the silence. "That's why I stopped coming to family gatherings. It was easier to pretend I didn't care about your opinions than admit how much it hurt." Grandma Ruth sat again, appearing smaller and more frail than I remembered. "We only wanted the best for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For the whole family." "I know, Grandma," I replied, my voice softer now. "But the best for me might not be what you imagine. And the same goes for Dylan." A faint smile touched Dylan's face for the first time that afternoon. I hated economics. Every macroeconomics class felt like a piece of me was dying. A few people chuckled, easing the tension somewhat. "So, what will you do now?" Belinda asked, seemingly lost. Dylan took a deep breath. "I'll try transferring to the music department. If not, I'll look at other universities. I'll consider other universities." The ensuing silence was heavy, but different. It was the silence of people processing painful, yet necessary truths. My mother approached, taking my hand. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for never standing up for you before." I squeezed her hand in return. "I didn't make things easier either," I admitted. It had been easier to distance myself than to explain. The sound of children playing returned, faintly heard. At some point, they had resumed their fun, oblivious to the adults' drama. Uncle Frank turned up the music, though lowered the volume. Belinda still seemed stunned. Uncle Greg stepped closer to his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Berkeley is an expensive school," he said. And for a moment, I thought I'd launch into another sermon. But then he continued, "We'll have to look into funding, scholarships, maybe a student loan." The smile that lit Dylan's face at that moment was worth more than any Harvard diploma. "Seriously, it won't be easy," Uncle Greg warned. "We need to talk more about this, but if this is what you truly want." Aunt Margaret approached me with a glass of water. Then, with an awkwardness that lingered, she asked, "What's this university professor gig like? How many classes do you teach a week?" The question, basic, almost naive, was more significant than any query she'd previously posed about my work. The semester's rhythm dictated my responses. Accepting the cup typically involved 3 or 4 classes, plus graduate student advising sessions. She seemed genuinely engaged, and I couldn't help but smile. Even on challenging days, I cherished the connection. For the first time, she refrained from sarcasm or witty remarks. Instead, she simply nodded and said, "It must be wonderful to love what you do." The rest of the afternoon held a different tone. It wasn't effortless or comfortable. Years of unspoken resentments and expectations needed resolution in a few short hours. Dylan approached me later as I prepared to leave. "Sorry for being such a poor student," he offered, a half-smile gracing his lips. "Sorry for not mentioning our kinship," I replied. He shrugged. "I suppose we both had our reasons." "You've actually been playing piano for 7 years?" I inquired. He nodded. "Care to listen?" A dusty antique piano sat in Uncle Frank's office. We entered. It was out of tune, some keys stuck. But when Dylan began to play, a deeper understanding arose. It wasn't just technique, it was passion. The music that flowed from his fingers was intricate, emotional, and vibrant. Upon his completion, I realized we had an audience. Nearly the entire family sat in respectful silence. "Is this yours?" Belinda asked. Dylan nodded, visibly nervous. "Expectations." "It's called Expectations," he admitted, his voice hesitant. No one spoke for a moment. Then, Grandma Ruth, leaning on her cane, stepped forward. "It's beautiful," she declared simply. And it was. A truth had been unearthed that day. Painful, imperfect, but genuine and real. When I finally drove home, I felt an unusual lightness. Not because everything was resolved, far from it. Difficult conversations and adjustments remained. But for the first time in years, I felt a potential belonging in this family. A real place, not a fabricated version of who they wanted me to be. Perhaps Dylan, too, had found his place. And in the end, that was all that mattered.